seats. We're going to call the committee to order. I'll give you a couple minutes to find your seat here. Let's get seated and we'll get started. Yes. So we're going to pass out just our general organizational discussion here. We'll go through it real quick. And then we're going to have our sergeant tell us how to exit safely in event of a bad day. So I guess I'd call it a bad day if we have to have that. So first off, welcome to Appropriations. We've been chairing this committee, I guess, for a while, and Finance and Claims a while before that. So it's nice to see some new faces. I'll, in time, get to know your names. My vision isn't particularly good till my other eye gets caught up, so it might take me a little while to notice, but staff helps me out who's working on stuff here. Anyway, I guess we'll introduce myself. I am Representative Lou Jones. I am the chair. Our vice chairs are here. I'll let our vice chairs introduce themselves, the three of them right here. Oh, and let me get the vice chairs introduced and I'll do roll call.
I'm Representative David Beatty.
I'm Representative Bill Mercer.
I am Vice Chair Mary Farrell from Helena.
Okay, so there are vice chairs. I'm getting old. I forgot roll call. Let's do roll call, please. And that way I can learn how to pronounce some names. So you've just got to, the pressure's on you to do it correct.
Vice Chair Beatty.
Here.
Vice Chair Mercer.
Here.
Vice Chair Cafaro.
Here.
Representative Albus. Here. Representative Barker.
Here.
Representative Crow. Here. Representative Falk.
Here.
Representative Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Representative Fox.
Here.
Representative Gillette. Here. Representative Hawk. Here. Representative Keogh. Here. Representative Matthews.
Here.
Representative Muskevich. Here. Representative Nicastro.
Here.
Representative Nave.
Here.
Representative Powers.
Here.
Representative Rosenzweig.
Here.
Representative Schillinger.
Here.
Representative Tuss.
Here.
Representative Vinton.
Here.
Representative Walsh.
Here.
Chair Jones.
Here. So we're all here. We're a big committee. Actually, we're the biggest committee. So we got to make sure that folks show up. We have a quorum when we begin. And anyway, so our staff, introducing them to you. This is our clerk, Faith Johnson. She'll be keeping us all in line and scolding me when I don't follow the rules. Our attorney, I believe, is online, Julie Johnson. You can see Julie online. And of course, Quinn here, Quinn Holzer is our staff. And if Quinn's unavailable, it's Josh. For those of you that don't know, the fiscal is right down the hall here. Please go and talk to the staff, ask questions, find out what you need. They're there for you. They're your staff. And so make sure you talk to them. This is our main hearing room. One of the things we do is we try to keep a snack bar up here with with coffee, water, a variety of items. In order to do that, Faith, we get coffee anyway, it's special coffee. But anyway, they try to have some stuff. We sometimes spend a lot of time in meetings, and having a few snacks up here matters. What we try to do is create a snack fund. Faith keeps track of that. I would suggest everyone give her $20. She will write your name down when you give her $20. And ultimately, that will allow us the privilege of, in our long days, having a little bit of snack fund there. So, it'll come around. Okay. And then hopefully we don't need to recharge that. Oh, and I missed that Ariel Hammerquist is running our video, our Zoom deal. There's Ariel on here, so that's our staff. She wasn't on this list, so So we are going to do these meetings as a combination of Zoom and in person. Obviously, if you're gone, you can Zoom this meeting, but you have your own link, and staff can give you a link that allows you to participate. That is not a link that we share with the public. Their link gives them audience, right? And then they're allowed to do public testimony, but they're not able to participate in the meeting until public testimony. The staff uses Teams. By now, you should all have Teams on your machines. If you want to communicate with staff, the most effective communication is to use Teams. So if you aren't good at it and you want to have effective communications, you can get good at it, or you're going to spend a lot of time walking down to catch up on stuff. So I would suggest getting good on Teams and some email. So there is staff will set up a Teams group, which will be this entire group, all of us. And so sometimes when there's something coming up, the whole group needs to know, or items that are happening, you'll get a group chat on Teams as well. Updates, reminders, etc. If you can't get on Teams or you're struggling with that technology, come talk to the staff. They'll help you get on Teams. The IT will work with you. I talked about the Zoom link for hearings and the unshareable one. You can bring your computer to this. A lot of folks do. That way they don't have to try to see the screens when people are on the screens. But remember, if you bring your computer, you're going to have to mute your mics. Otherwise, you'll start creating a interference with the speakers. Okay. Also, the LSD, the Legislative Service Division, has created a branch website for agencies and lobbyists and others to be able to get a link if they just want to testify. Okay, members sponsoring bills. So if you're sponsoring a bill and you're presenting in this committee, and I do this because it's a big committee and we walk over the top of each other, if you're on this committee and you have a bill to give, as I do today, then I'm okay with you presenting your bill from your seat on this committee. For the most, or you can choose, like Representative Mercer tends to choose, to go to the podium. I don't mind either way. But I do authorize folks to be able to present from their seat if their members are giving a bill. And I do so many of these things because we see so much legislation and we're such a big committee. We don't like getting late and behind all the time. Rules. We keep a copy of the rules up here. They're at least a small copy of the rules. It can be distributed. We don't normally have rule problems here, but we will keep copies available if we have to have a rules discussion. Proxy forms, if you're going to not be here and if someone vote for you, you have to have a signed proxy. Or you have to email. You can send an email in as well, but there has to be notice that you're on a proxy and who has your proxy. The vice chairs take care of the proxies normally. By now you should have had a packet full of proxies handed to you. My suggestion is sign a bunch of them so that your vice chair has them, so that if somebody can vote for you. Otherwise, because they're going to have to show that they have a signed proxy when they put what you voted on a bill if you're called on a vote. So make sure you get your proxies in. The vice chairs will manage that, and the staff will tell you when you're running out of proxy forms. Quorum, we have to have 12 out of the 23 people to do business. Obviously, it's Mason's version of parliamentary procedure. We don't need a second here, but I also tend to, for instance, if there's debate going on there, it is appropriate times to call the question, to call the vote. I will never accept, and that's allowed in the chair's discretion, a call of the question till each side has at least had an opportunity to speak. At some point, we don't have 20 people speaking, but I do always want folks to be able to have their say at some level before I'll accept a call of the question. Table is another motion that comes up. That's actually non-debatable. And again, it does put the bill onto the table, but it's not disposed of. Bills can be pulled off the table later. We as a committee can create a bill if we agree. It's a simple majority of vote. So if we're going on and we find that we need a committee bill to do something, we can vote and create a bill. So scheduling. So again, we see so many bills that I tend to, not early on, I'm saying this and you'll think, geez, there's nothing going on, it's boring. It gets over being boring in a hurry. It's just the system has to charge up, right? It's got no bills coming off the bore. But I tend to schedule bills almost as soon as we get them. I have to give 3 days notice. I try to hear bills almost immediately, 5 or 6 at a time. We push that. I never want to be in a position, like, to be honest, Finance and Claims was last year where they had 3-minute hearings. I've never been there in either place. So we hear stuff all the time. We hear it regularly. It's the same on don't normally hold bills. Once in a while, there's a reason, right? We're waiting for a second bill to catch up, or we'll hear a couple tomorrow where we hold those bills because budget amendments and some of those things continue, and we amend the bill to catch us up right to the date of time as late as we can hold it, simply because it's an ongoing item during the session. Okay, members proposing amendments need to submit them right away. I will, sometimes if there's a bill, we'll ask, if folks will say, I want to amend that, I'll give you a couple days, and if the amendment system is plugged, maybe 3. But if you don't go get your amendment, at some point we're going to act on the bill without it, right? Go get your amendments. We are not going to have folders full of bills that we don't act upon. And again, I'm reasonable if there's a reason. We just can't have endless amendments. Also, if you're going to amend somebody's bill in this capital, in this committee or any committee, it's always your right to propose an amendment to anyone's bill. That is, respect is you go tell the sponsor you're proposing an amendment to your bill, to their bill, right? I will ask when you bring it up, is this a friendly amendment? I would hope that you would be able to tell me, yes, the sponsor agrees with this amendment, or no, the sponsor is not in agreement with this amendment. When you blindside somebody and amend their bill without telling them, you create bad feelings that take a long time to heal. You have a right to amend a bill even if they disagree, or try to amend it. But check on it. So we changed our limits some this year. You've got to remember just how big the state budget is in billions of dollars. And so we're going to, in the first house, an annual bill below $250,000 will not come to us, right? So if it spends less than $250,000 in the first house, when it comes back over, right, say it comes from the second house, both houses will see a bill a little slightly smaller because then you're getting the end of the session. You're trying to fit everything into the budget at $125,000 annually. So we're going to have bills referred to us each day on the floor. I go through the fiscal notes. Actually, Quinn sends notes up as well, and the floor will be referring bills that are big enough down to us. Not a big fan of conceptual amendments where you say, I need to conceptually amend this bill and change something. In fact, they're extremely discouraged. Again, if it's right at the end, we're waiting for a written amendment, is going to make a bill miss a deadline, we'll talk about conceptuals, or if they're extremely simple, we're placing the word "thou" with an A or something, right? But if it's at any way complex, for the record, we're better off getting a written amendment. They like at least 24 hours. So we have to act in our deadlines. You'll get to know them. The transmittal is the 67th day. You'll begin to see this pick up as it gets close to that. And again, we will also have bills. Every section will have some bills for implementing their sections A through, well, not F as much. It's its own bills. But we'll have the implementing bills. We'll have them, and we'll have to work on them as it gets to the end. Scope of the debate in here. We are a fiscal committee, right? And so as I say that, policy legislators vote on the budget on the floor all the time. They get to vote on the budget. All of you are interested in policy as well, right? But in this committee, we try to focus the conversation on the fiscal impacts. Money is a scarce resource. It always is. There's more demand for bills than there is money. So we try to stay focused on the fiscal to the greatest extent possible. Obviously, they're always linked. So I always give some grace unless we're not going to completely rehear a 3-hour policy debate in here. We're not a policy committee. But I will give some grace to to be able to answer policy questions, etc. And I tell the lobbyists when they present and the folks when they give their bills, try to focus on the fiscal note. We're a fiscal committee. Tell us why this spend is a priority over the other spends that this committee is offered. You're going to find that there's a ton of good ideas and not enough money all the time. Parliamentary clarity, you know, Mason's is an interesting book. It's rare we run into something that's confusing, but the one thing that Mason's does different than Robert's Rules of Order is the chair can always stand at ease until we get something. So if stuff gets confusing, whether it's the right motion or it's a debatable or non-debatable, or there's something that's confusing, we'll stand at ease for a bit till we get it right. And in truth, if it gets so heated it's getting out of control, we'll stand at ease and let her cool off. I rarely have ever had to do that, but I don't like out-of-control committees. I expect people to treat each other respectfully. Debate's respectful. We have a constitutional obligation to do a balanced budget. We're going to have to talk about that. That means that the revenue minus expenses has to be some number greater than zero. That means you have to control the expenses and, in truth, can only cut so much revenue. You can't, unlike the federal government, we don't get to run a deficit, and that's probably a dang good thing. House Bill 2 is seen through here right now. House Bill 2 is out in the work of the subcommittees, right? You'll all be working on your sections of House Bill 2, trying to put together the best product you can, debating that. That will be reported back. And of course, when House Bill 2 comes back into this committee, then everybody gets to look at everyone else's section. Yeah, I've always seen them as these little bowls, and it's fascinating because it's amazing how well E can do cutting B's budget, and B can do cutting C's budget. So do your work in your own subcommittee sections first, and then, yes, folks do get a shot at everyone else's section, but I would say that you're now talking to folks that spent about 45 days focused on that section and have become somewhat of an expert in that section. If you would like them to respect your work on your section, at least be respectful of their work at some level of their section, right? Because they truly have done their work as well. Right now, we're trying to get stuff organized. The Senate's in a little bit of chaos on who's on where, and but ultimately there will be some directions given to subcommittee chairs, etc. Right now, the direction is do good work and try to do the best you can till that gets smoothed out. Okay, there's a bunch of resources that are available. There's so many we could list them till your head would swim, but status sheets that show where we are and tools that measure our progress are available. They will become more and more useful to you. Do you have some stuff you want to demonstrate there? Just talk about it generally today, Gwen?
Yeah, we have a couple. Mike and Josh are here. If you want to
I think we'll do a little bit of training here in just a little bit, but maybe we'll do House Bill 1 first. So we'll show some of these tools, and we're going to talk about these tools. We're also going to talk about, Representative Gillette brought a fair question up about budget amendments versus budget change documents versus some supplemental appropriations. We're going to do a little bit of a discussion about that because that matters in our committees. The fiscal staff is the best staff. Arguably, we've got the best staff in the building. I always say that, and we count Julie Johnson as fiscal, by the way. So anyway, we've got the best staff in the building. So go ask the staff. They do an outstanding job for all of us. So I also always schedule this meeting early, right? Because to begin with, as you can see, there's not enough business to keep the floor full. So I'll always tend to schedule this meeting at 2 p.m. Now, if the floor runs long, the meeting starts at 3, but the reason I've got to show it at 2 p.m. is to tell the public it might start at 2 p.m. If we can start early, we get more done, we can end early. If by happen chance the floor goes wrong, then I guess the people going to present are going to wait till we get here because we're not going to start. But it's disrespectful to say that you're going to start at 3 and then start at 2. Somebody might not be able to be here and here. So I'm thinking that, so I guess I just tried to touch on all this stuff. You've all been here a while, or the vast majority of you. I guess maybe not as much as sometimes. So if you have questions, ask a senior legislator. We make this thing work. Ask senior people what's going on. Treat each other with respect. This committee will run well. It has in the past. It will again. So with that, is there any questions or comments from the vice chairs? Vice Chair Mercer, or whichever one of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to make two comments focused really on all the freshmen. Welcome to the committee. Two things that happen early on here is you will start seeing bills on the floor, and certainly we've seen circumstances in certain sessions where it seems like the tenor of the debate on the floor is, go ahead and vote yes, because they'll have to deal with an appropriations. We don't want to encourage that sort of behavior because that only increases the workload down here. So if you're picking that up from your non-appropriator colleagues, I think we would appreciate it if the message back was, no, you have to make a decision about whether that policy idea with that fiscal note is something that is worthy of further consideration. If it's not, then dispose of it before it goes to appropriations. So that's one thing. The other thing is, in January, you have very limited frame of reference in terms of the fiscal notes that you're seeing. So something comes up here that's going to cost $350,000. You might say, well, we've got that room on the status sheet for that. But of course, you're not thinking about what you're going to be looking at later in February. You have no context for that. So I'm sure you will hear some of us say, this may look almost innocuous, but in the larger scheme of things, this just isn't worth it. And that's why we're saying vote no. But it's hard to have that context in January because you haven't started to see the full inventory that you would have a wiser perspective on as the session goes along. So those are two things that I wanted to throw out.
Vice Chair Beatty.
Yeah, just to follow on to my esteemed colleague from Billings. So one of the challenges of being on appropriations is dealing with what is referred to as dogs and cats. If you haven't been here before, I use the rather inelegant expression that appropriation is where dogs and cats go to get euthanized. Dog and cat bills are bills with appropriations that aren't in the House Bill 2 budget, and eventually many worthy things that have passed through the legislature or passed through the House come here, and we have to make that hard decision. And as Vice Chair Mercer said, that's why it's important to gain a perspective on those bills, because as it turns out, if they're not prioritized somewhere else, they're prioritized here. And so we can't escape there is a false dichotomy that is sometimes pops up, and that is that policy and the fiscal impacts are in stovepipes and aren't related. But every dollar that we appropriate here has a policy associated with it. So this is why appropriations is an exciting place to be, and so welcome aboard. I say that on behalf of the captain here.
Welcome aboard. Yeah, money is a scarce resource, right? And we were getting some of that behavior from some of our policy committees, which is and tax was doing that to us a lot, passing every tax cut known to man and saying, well, we just voted for every tax cut and approps can sort it out. So we killed half the tax cuts in the place because you can't have zero revenue. And so it becomes some unique behavior where if the policy committees do no prioritization and send it to approps and yell at us because, well, you're killing all our good bills. Well, you sent all of them. So we don't have enough revenue to make it work. And so they're absolutely correct. I hope that's not the case. We had conversations about that. It usually ends up being the case, but it is hopeful that that's not the case. With that, is there any other questions at this point for the good of the order? Actually, I have one more thing, and then we'll ask for questions. Our sergeant is in the back of the room, Sergeant. And our sergeant has to ensure that we're safe. He has been here before. He has met us before. He's done a good job. Sergeant, would you like to address us on our safety protocols?
Thank you, Chairman Jones and committee. My name is Sergeant Marco Uribe, and giving some of the safety protocols for the committee. So a little bit of background on myself. Retired military and correctional officer, and was into martial arts and all this other stuff. So your safety is definitely my concern. And we've been here training for 1 month, dealing with different scenarios, and that's what we've come up with for your safety and security. And of course the public and the body as a whole. So this is done so you guys could have an efficient time. You don't have to worry about, what's going on outside, because that's my job, and it'll give you time to do your, what corresponds to your work. Now, one of the things with, we're going to clear when we have to clear the committee room, the rally point for everybody basically is the chamber, and the chairman will make the call on that. Just keep in mind, I will relay information that I get through this little thing on my ear. And so we'll go over the next scenarios. If we have a earthquake, we're going to revert back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We're all going to duck and cover our desks. The public, as best you can, the chairs, and whoever we could fit in these doorways. After we get the all clear, we will evacuate, the committee room. In this case, we have different evacuation routes, which that is always fluid, but we do have the committees, evacuation. We go out door over here to our north entrance, and the rally point will be basically in front of the Historical Society Museum. And we could also use this evacuation route for the public door, in which case we will go out under the stairs. Same thing, we'll meet in front of the museum. Now, alternate route, we do have, if we need to, we could use the committee exit here into the office and then exit through the stairs. That would be for, earthquake. Fires, same thing, and we do have fire extinguishers and first aid and AED equipment that's available for us for in case we have any medical emergencies, at which time we would still evacuate the committee first and the public, if we have a medical emergency. That way our first responders, will have a more clear room, to work on whoever needs to be worked on. When it comes to, unfortunately, for active shooter, we have our we have a run, hide, or fight proceed. That's the policy we're going with. Basically, here, if we have to barricade inside this room and exit, we have our windows, which we don't have to worry about falling or tripping. We have a level area to step on. Now, that being said, if we have to barricade in here, we will use some of our desks or chairs, barricade as best we can. And the policy on that is you go to the rally point or you get to your vehicles, you will report, once you're at whatever area you deemed you're safe, you could message amongst yourselves for that's accountability purposes. My case, well, since your security is my job, I will deal with threats as need be. So that's where we stand at that. If you have any doubts about the evacuation routes, they are posted by the doors, and wherever part of the building you're at. So it's something to keep an eye out for. Now, this being said, when you evacuate, I would recommend you keep your keys, you keep anything that's essential for your job, because you have to consider it may be considered a crime scene, and or in the case of a fire or earthquake, fire marshal might deem that the building is unsafe to enter. So if you leave it here, it's going to be here for a while. So I do recommend you keep your essential items with you. Decorum. Now, as far as, decorum kind of intertwines with the safety rules. This middle section is not to be entered by, anybody other than I could enter it, but it's rarely done. And the reason is we have trip hazards, and we don't want to disconnect certain electronics that would interfere with doing your jobs here. So it would, as it set us back, we would have to call the techs to work on it. Other than that, we do have, I will ask the public, if you have any lobbyists, or if you need to speak to a representative, they could come through me. I will relay the message to you, and we could meet with them out here in the section, or if you decide to have them step out, you could meet with them outside. But we are definitely to keep any lobbyists or reporters from keeping them from going behind you, and that is for your safety reasons on you, and also to respect the privacy of others. So, and last, I will say that if you see something, you can say something. I mean, to whether it's state troopers out there or myself, and we will pass the information. If you need to let the chairman know, he could also pass the information to me. But basically, that's what we're going with. See something, say something. I mean, I will try to do my best. We'll give it 150% to try to make sure you guys are safe and you have the time to do your job. And if I don't see it and you tell me, I do not take personal offense, I will act on the information that you relate to me. And that is all.
Questions for the sergeant?
If you have any questions, it would be the time.
Okay, Representative.
Mobility issues, we do have the tracks, for in case we have to go down any stairs. And normally when we do have any prior knowledge, we will have wheelchairs and everything. I will modify the seating arrangement so we can have mobility available. So.
Okay, additional? Representative.
I just want to say welcome back and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your service, sir, and thank you, and I'm sure we'll be talking. You did an outstanding job last time as well, so it's good to see you back, sir. Okay, with that, Quinn, our staff has some discussion about some emails and items that got sent out, wants to make sure you're receiving the information.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, hopefully most of you received, I did send out 2 emails last week with kind of an overview of the schedule for this week and what's happening in this committee, as well as the Zoom link for your use. If you did not get that email, please talk to me. We'll figure out what happened there. I know some people don't like to use the LegMT email. However, with the email system that they've set up where it's automatic within our system, that's the only email it will recognize. So if you don't use that email, talk to me and we'll figure some other way of communication out. On top of that, I have set up something in Teams to be able to communicate with everyone. I have not sent anything via Teams yet, but I will try to do that in the next week so that people can begin to make sure they know how to use it and see if any issues arise there. Finally, I did just want to comment. There are a variety of ways where you can, the system is new. We're all learning with seeing how the bills are listed and the hearings and everything. And I know there's some question about some bills that are going to long-range planning that are currently sitting in House Appropes. And the example was that they started hearing House Bill 9 this morning. House Bill 9 still shows as being in House Appropes. And depending on how you look, if you're looking at the House Appropes committee page, it says House Bill 9 has a hearing scheduled, but it's not being heard in this committee. And that's just one of the things that's going to be a little frustrating and figuring out in the system. If you click on the bill itself, then you can see that it's being heard in the long-range planning. So if you have questions on that, let me know, but I will try to share a schedule that I will make up specifically to make sure that there's, to minimize any confusion about what bills are being heard when. But if you have questions, please reach out, let me know. Thank you.
Questions for Quinn? Okay, and it gets easier. It's just a little bit of time, and you get used to who to ask and who to talk to, and so it's good. With that, I'm going to turn the chairman over to you, and we're going to do House Bill 1. So if you would run that mic, Chair Beatty.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. So this opens the hearing on House Bill 1. Would you care to open on your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the record, my name is Lou Jones. I am the representative of House District 18. You should all have before you House Bill 1. House Bill 1 is known as the feed bill. It was pre-introduced in December of 2024. What the feed bill does is it basically, and I'll go through some details on it, but effectively it pays for the operations of this session. It pays all of your salaries, the per diems, the salaries of the staff that are directly functional in the session, right? And the feed bill also, last session's feed bill pays for about 2 weeks. I think it's actually 17 days of this session. This year's feed bill will pay for a similar amount of next session. So we're actually running on the end of last bill's feed bill. The reason we do the feed bill right away is it's got to get through the House, through the Senate, and be signed into law by the governor, or we run out of money, and I doubt that there'll be a lot of staff and folks working when they're not being paid. So if the feed bill doesn't always get it perfectly well, right? But any money that's left over reverts at the leadership's discretion to the general fund or the Information Technology Reserve Fund. Obviously, you see there's a lot of tech going on in this room. So let's talk about this feed bill. It's about $19.1 million, of which the Senate is $6.2 million. The House is House is twice as big, remember, $10.4 million, and the Legislative Services Division is $2.395 million. And again, that's not the only legislative services budget, right? That's just stuff associated with this this session. There is a budget for the in House Bill 2 that will be discussed through the subs. And I'm going to not say all of them, but some of the expenses covered. I touched some of that. Legislative salaries, per diem, benefits, mileage, House and Senate staff salaries, House and Senate operational costs, leadership discretionary funds, legislative service division costs, that's us, bill printing, distribution, publications, House and Senate phones, constituent services allowance, legislature orientation and leadership. Again, with the same thing you went through this year to get here, that occurs again. That's prepaying that committee presiding officer training for the next time, pre-session operational costs, the 2025 feed bill, and we have added some additional staff that are more partisan staff, some additional pieces, so it's about 16.2% more. Part of that is the legislators you don't get to increase your own pay, so the pay plan that the raises that went in effect, we get the same pay increases that the state does, which was I think it was $1.50 twice, but we don't get it at the time frame they do because you don't get to ever vote for your own salary increase. So the $3 an hour increase the legislators got comes all at once in this time frame. So you've got basically an increase in some legislator pay. Of course, staff salaries are up. There's some increased staffing, increased House and Senate operations. We had some startup costs, while it contains about $856,000 for the next session startup costs, which again funds the first 17 days of the session. Well, actually, that's the 2023 was $850. The next session proposes about $1.3 million for a startup. So anyway, I can go through this in detail, but the expert on this is our Miss Angie Carter, who is the head of this section. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, rather than me pretend I understand this in complete detail, I am going to have her inform me so that I can answer Representative Mercer's questions on the floor when he tries to ask them. So with that, I'm going to sit down and defer to staff to go through and explain the bill in detail. This is our staff's bill.
Very well. Ms. Carter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Angie Carter, C-A-R-T-E-R, and I am the Legislative Branch Financial Manager. I'm supposed to say I'm here as an informational witness to follow decorum, Mr. Chair, so do you want me to say that and then sit down and wait for questions?
Chairman Jones, since you're carrying this bill.
That's true.
I have deemed it acceptable to depart from decorum and allow you to present this so that, and then we'll go to proponents, opponents, and any other informational witnesses who might be.
Sounds good, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So as Representative Jones did say, the feed bill is $19 million for the 25 session and then the startup for the 27 session. The expenses covered are legislator salaries, per diem, House and Senate salaries, mileage for session, House and Senate operational costs, and in the Legislative Services Division, it's the bill printing shop that's down in the basement, information office, which is sitting out here right across from the state troopers, and then publications and also your constituent services allowance, which I'm sure you all have been very briefed on that by Nikki over here behind me. And then as for next session, the startup costs, last session for the 23 session, the reason why there's such a larger increase in the startup costs is because we only had 5 days of salary last session, and this session we do have 10 days of salary for the startup costs. That is part of the prior feed bill to fund the next session, and it's always a separate appropriation. And it's just until the new feed bill passes. And then the Legislative Services Division budget, I already went through the publications, but some of them include session laws, history and final status, MCA indexing, rules books, copper books, and LFD tax and training. This session also will pay for an AV engineer, half a research analyst, and half an attorney for bill drafting purposes, session system support contracts, and then also there's an amount in there for outside legal for the legislative privilege ruling that came out of the First Judicial District Court. And that's about it, Mr. Chair, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. I'll have you stand by for questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
At this point, are there any proponents? If there are any proponents, please come to the microphone, identify yourself. Are there any proponents online? Seeing none, are there any opponents in the room? Any opponents online? Seeing none, are there any further? Yes.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to let you know that there's no one signed up online.
Thank you. Are there any additional informational witnesses?
Yes, I'm Jerry Howe, the Director of Legislative Services Division. Happy to answer any questions when we get to that point, but I just put my name on the record for an informational witness.
Thank you, Director.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Dale Gow, G-O-W. I'm the Chief Information Officer. I'm also an informational witness.
Are there any more informational witnesses in the room? Are there any informational witnesses online?
Mr. Chair, there are no informational witnesses online.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Ms. Carter.
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Carter, I heard you give some verbal breakdowns. Do you have anything in writing that I can look at for the ledge services portion of both sessions? Something that's broken down maybe into personal services like we would normally see in a budget committee?
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk, if I can ask, did this get passed out in the packet?
Not in mine.
Yes, I have that, Mr. Chair, Representative Falk. I have that, and I can get that to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Gillette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Ms. Carter. I think maybe similar to Representative Falk's question, I think I'm having trouble breaking out what is just business as usual, just things that we organically do and we've always done and will continue to do to support the legislature. And then what it sounds like there's, in my terminology, I would call like new proposals, things that are being added. And I can't really sort out in my mind which is which. I think that there's about a $2.5 million difference between last House Bill 1 last session and this one, and the time before that, it was a $3.5 million difference. So that was 2021 to 2023. So I see that we're decreasing it a little bit, but still kind of still uncertain about, of that $2.5 million, how much is that's just business as usual versus new things that we're doing or proposing. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gillette, if I may kind of give a high-level breakdown of what the increases are and what is included in those increases, what's new, and then what's existing. For the Legislative Services Division, there is a significant increase in paper and printing supply costs. Also in the 2023 session, there was only 3 printers down in the basement to print the bills, and that includes all amendments that come out of committee and also out of the chambers. So this year, they asked for another leased printer. The secondary and the primary amounts for constituent services, we were able to reduce that a little bit based on actual spends in for the 23 feed bill. So then in the staffing portion of the session, of the Legislative Services Division, the staff matrix all across the board for not only Legislative Services Division, but also the House and the Senate did increase by about 12%. And that goes in front of the Legislative Council every year and is approved by Legislative Council prior to implementation every session. And that's a pretty big increase. So far, everything that I've said has just been business as usual and was included in the 23 feed bill. Included also in the 23 feed bill was the half a researcher and the half an attorney that will also carry forward to this feed bill. We also have always hired an additional AV temp just for session for things like when the sergeant was talking about the technology that you see in the room. So we always have to have a little bit of extra coverage to make sure that committee and chamber goes smoothly. We also pay for contracted services, has always been part of the feed bill, the support of the session suite of applications, which include bill drafting committee and chamber, and then the House and Senate chamber vote boards. We have contractors on staff or on site, for session to ensure that anything that happens can be taken care of quickly and we don't have to call the contractor in from out of town or out of state. And also the outside legal for legislator privilege ruling. This is, I believe, this is new, $125,000 line item. However, last session in House Bill 2, we did get a restricted one-time only appropriation for the outside legal. I think as of right now, we've spent $10,000 of it, I think, and so we still have $40,000 left in House Bill 2 that we can pay through 6/30 of 25. And so that's just switching funding, but if we don't use it for outside legal, it just reverts. We don't use it for anything else. House and Senate, let's just hit them real quick. Legislator salary did increase by $3 an hour, so that's $24 a day. The federal per diem rate, which in statute is what you get for session, increased by $35 a day. This is all just business as normal. And also, I had to increase the budget line just a little bit for term legislators. So when a legislator terms out, we are required to pay for an additional 6 months of salary. So their term is over 12/31. We actually have to pay state share, state share and insurance through 6/30 of 25 of the odd year, And then the other big part of the increase for House and Senate was House Bill 13 that you will listen to for the 2025 session. It increases not only the state share, but it also increases legislator pay. And again, it won't become effective. The legislator pay won't become effective until the 27 session, but it is quite an increase. So in order for it to be funded for that startup session for 27, I had to put it into this feed bill because House Bill 2 gets an appropriation to fund House Bill 13 statutory increases. House Bill 1 does not. So I had to build it into this budget. And that's it at a high level. I am still happy to send out a detailed explanation of what's in there and what's existing and what's new. Mr. Chair.
Follow up?
Chair, I have a question for Mr. Chair. So I think I heard, if I'm thinking about it right, that Ms. Carter said that in House Bill 13, part of it was this anticipated increase that would happen in a bill that we haven't really considered or voted on yet. I'm just kind of trying to make all that right in my mind, how we can pass a bill out of here based upon a future bill that we haven't even heard and not sure if it'll pass. Like,
because we have to make the assumption, because this bill has to go first, otherwise we shut down the session.
I get the logistics of it.
And so we always have to do that, which is why at the very beginning of this, I said if it doesn't get spent, it reverts. But we have to assume it's real, because if it's real and we don't do it, we're at a loss. So it's the standard practice to match up with what's in 13. And if 13 doesn't happen, then it goes back to the leadership gets to revert it as discussed. It doesn't get wasted, but this bill matches the predictions sent forth because this bill moves first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think follow for the chair, my last one. I think it's just a little bit of a kind of struggle with me in general, in the sense that I feel like it's almost like a supplemental. It's been spent. It's projected to be spent. We're on track to have it spent. It would be ridiculous for us not to pass this at this point. So we're just kind of between a rock and a hard spot. If we wanted to change this, we really couldn't, because it's already been committed. So I think that's just my feedback about this process that feels a little weird to me.
Am I open to, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, I'm Mr. Chair at this point. I'm always happy to a new plan of how we would do a feed bill, but currently this is the process of the feed bill. I mean, it is how it works. It is something that the council and all the leadership weigh in on. To be honest, Chair Glim and I worked with Ms. Carter on working through what was in this one. It matches up what's coming. And when you look at the increases, it was largely all the Zoom and audio video where we allowed the public to participate. It took a whole lot of tech to put all the audio, video technology into place to allow folks not to have to come to the Capitol to participate. And staff. I mean, and then the staff to run all the audio and visual. So it was an interesting process, but I guess sometimes transparency and public participation comes at a cost. So if that is the answer you're looking for.
Further questions? Representative Vinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question first for Ms. Carter.
Mr. Chair, Representative Vinton.
You had mentioned the staff increased at 12%. Is that over the biennium or is that yearly?
So I'm going to, if that's okay, Mr. Chair, can I refer that to our Executive Director, Jerry Howe? Mr. Chair.
Redirect. Mr. Howe.
The 12% increase comes from the matrix increases that were approved by the Legislative Council. That's an average of 12%. So those matrix come forward for the House and Senate staff, for the temporary staff, and that's how that goes. You're not to look at that like the people in the Legislative Service Division are getting that kind of pay increase. So those are the matrices. The point here is there are 3 employees that 2 of which were funded in 2023. One of them is a researcher, half of a researcher, primarily for drafting bills, and half of an attorney. We have a part-time attorney that works through the interim part-time. During the session, they're full-time. So we're seeking funding so that those 2 people can be on staff to work for you drafting bills. The third person here is an AV tech. We have a contract out of Billings to provide AV support during session. That contract is rather expensive because it requires lodging and per diem. We can save money on that contract and get 1 full-time employee for the entire interim for the cost of that 4-month contract. So that's why we're asking for this AV FTE in this, and that represents the lion's share of this increase that we're talking about on this line item. Additional questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Representative Vinton.
Yeah, just to clarify, over what time frame is that?
The time frame for?
You mentioned matrix, but that increase, I mean, are we talking, is that a yearly increase?
That's for the entire biennium.
The biennium, okay.
Yes.
So, all right, thank you. Follow-up for the chair, please.
Follow-up?
Representative Vinton.
As a newbie on here, and again, trying to absorb and get all these numbers, I do feel like it's kind of been alluded to by some of the other representatives that there's some information missing, because my initial question was, what was the increase over the prior budget, which seems like a simple question that I don't have that in my packet, and maybe everybody else does, but it seems like there's some other information that would be helpful to us.
Okay, and I believe we have that spreadsheet en route, just so you can have the spreadsheet. Is that? So there is a spreadsheet coming that will give you some of that information. The challenge we have is this was what leadership on both sides of the aisle negotiated to pay their staff that's currently working upstairs. And so that's why the feed bill becomes kind of a, it's unlikely we're going to the staff upstairs and suggest that we're going to change the pay that the leadership offered them to do the job. So that's why it comes out of council, to be brutally honest.
That's right, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Are there, let's see, this has just been distributed down this way. Representative Albus, did you have a follow-on question?
Are we able to make a motion to deny our pay increase as legislators and senators?
Not in this bill. So used to.
That's all right, Chairman Jones. Are there any further questions? Yeah, Vice Chair Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a follow-up for Ms. Carter, please.
Mr. Chair, Representative Mercer.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Carter, can you go back over what you said at the very end of your presentation about the outside legal costs associated with the order from the First Judicial District? I think you said that as part of this request, there is a budget of $125,000 contemplated for outside counsel. Help us understand what that's for and how you arrived at that estimate.
Mr. Chair, Representative Mercer, I just put the line item in the budget. I would actually also defer that to Executive Director Howe. I don't have the information of how that dollar amount was decided upon, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. No objection if you want to re-refer that.
Let's re-refer that question to Mr. Howe.
Vice Chair Beatty, thank you.
Let me, Mr. Chairman, if I may just restate it, I'm trying to figure out, Executive Director, how we arrived at the need for $125,000 for outside counsel when we have an order in place already from the district court. What's the purpose of that budget?
The order from the district court, as you may know, is being challenged. We need money to pay the attorneys on that challenge, and whatever direction that case goes, that it will also likely be challenged to the Supreme Court. So in order to have representation on this issue through the appeal process to its final destination, our estimate is about $125,000 in legal fees. Now, we may be right about that, we may be wrong, but if we've overestimated, the money reverts, right? So we don't want to underestimate it, because then we will be in a difficult position of needing counsel and not being able to pay for it. So this is a line item to help us get through the appeal process on this case.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Executive Director. I do have one follow-up.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Chairman Jones. Following up on the question from Representative Gillette, is there any reason why we couldn't say that any amount that reverts from House Bill 1 would revert to the general fund? Or maybe a narrower question, is there any reason why we couldn't say that anything in here that is contingent upon other legislation passing would revert to House Bill 1? So if the increase in the hourly rate paid to legislators is not approved in House Bill 13, then that would lower the need for the feed bill amount. It certainly wouldn't zero it out, but it would reduce it. Is there any reason why we couldn't say in here that anything contingent upon legislation would revert to the general fund?
Well, you could just change it so that it said money not expended will revert to the general fund and not to general fund or the information technology reserve account, because that's the two places it reverts now. And so we could just direct it was always the general fund, although I would, again, this is our staff's work here. I imagine the information technology reserve tends to be where we're always short of money as well, right? It's been our challenge of late. So that's where the excess has been primarily going, is our data systems, as you're aware. So it reverts now to one of the two places. It's the leadership gets to choose which one.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Representative Tuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question, I believe, for Executive Director Howe. And perhaps one of your staff. Executive Director Howe, for all of us, information for all of us, particularly half the committee that's new to this committee, could you talk a little bit about what this case is that we're spending the $125,000 on? Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think that we've discussed what this case is.
We have not discussed that case. I probably want to defer that to our legal director, Todd Everts, who's been involved in the case. I do have some briefing on it. I'm named in that lawsuit, just so you all know that. But I would like perhaps Todd to discuss that. He had some role in the interpretation of the district court's opinion that resulted in the challenge. So I'd defer to Todd Everts.
Mr. Everts.
Mr. Chairman, members of the House Appropriation, for the record, my name is Todd Everts, your Chief Legal Counsel and Co-Commissioner for the Legislature. The money that was put in there was for two parts related to this case. One, we have hired agency legal services to represent the division in this case, and part of that money would go to that. The other part is implementing the court order in terms of the privilege that was expressed in terms of the junk files and the resources necessary to go through those junk files and all the communications and classify which communications are privileged and which aren't, and then releasing that. So really two components for that. The litigation component, and then again, the implementation of the court order until we hear otherwise.
Follow-up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, Mr. Everett, so this has to do with the junk file case that has received some press recently with regard to the district court, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tuss, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, just maybe a couple logistical questions. So this is a fiscal bill, but I don't see a fiscal note. Is this intended to be the fiscal note in the body of the bill?
The body of the bill is the fiscal note.
Okay. So that wouldn't be one online in the Bill Explorer then either, as a follow-up?
I understand actually incorrectly, the executive asked for a fiscal note on this bill, but when the entire fiscal impact of a bill is included, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I'm so used to answering that I should hand you this mic, but I don't have it. So I apologize. Mr. Chair, Representative Falk, yes, when the entire fiscal impact of a bill is included in the bill, it doesn't have to have an additional fiscal note because this says what the bill is spending its dollars on, although I believe that my intent would be on the floor to probably include the spreadsheet.
Fair enough. One follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Follow-up.
And probably for you, Mr. Chair, when are we planning to take executive action on this?
We are contemplating taking executive action today.
Okay.
Further questions?
One more follow-up. One more, maybe? She can go first.
Representative Falk, since your mic is hot, go ahead.
Nice. To paraphrase what the bill presenter said earlier, it sounds like because of the process, specifically through Ledge Council, we don't really have a whole lot of choice. We can talk about it. We can dig into the details, but is that a correct understanding of the situation?
I will redirect that to the bill carrier.
It's a timing challenge, right? Our challenge becomes this bill has to successfully get out of this committee across the House floor through finance and claims, hopefully not get amended, which stops it, and have a governor's signature in time to allow us to continue operations. If it does not do that, then our ability to pay, even if the legislators were able to, which I would think a whole lot of them are not going to be able to, but even if the legislators were able to operate without pay, I doubt that our staff is. So there is always a pressure on House Bill 1. This is not an unusual conversation, but since leadership through the council is involved, and then Ms. Carter tries to work with both the Appropriations and Finance Chair in getting it set up, there's always, this is not a unique conversation. There's always a House Bill 13, which in answer, well, we know all this. The previous legislator set this legislator's salaries, etc. There is a proposal in 13 for the next legislator's salaries. If it doesn't pass, then a reversion will occur. So you can obviously vote on that there as well, if that's your choice. But it is difficult. I always fear delaying this bill. I mean, can I delay it to tomorrow? Probably. But each day you delay it could end up with you saying, well, we're going to have a few days off while we wait for the pay to catch up.
Fair enough. I have another follow-up.
Pardon me, last time you said one, right? Representative Falk, go ahead.
I changed my mind. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the fact that we only got this breakdown during the presentation, I think it would be wise to put off executive action until tomorrow to give the committee a chance to look this over a little bit more and further develop an understanding of what we're voting on.
Further questions? Representative Nave? No. Representative Matthews? I thought someone from that side of the table was. No, all right. I don't see any further questions here. Would you like to close on your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Welcome to the feed bill. As I've heard this conversation any number of times. Obviously, we can delay for a day. The conversation won't be the same tomorrow, but we can delay for the day and the conversation will be the same on the floor. So I guess I'll ponder that. But with that, I close.
This closes the hearing on House Bill 1. I turn the gavel back over to Chairman Jones.
And to continue that conversation, that is a fair question. The challenge is, when you look at the pay increases in there, that's what's currently being paid to the staff on the floor, right? It's not like we're going to be able to rediscuss that. This is what the legislators signed up to be paid this year. We can't really change what they agreed to be paid this year. We can talk about next session, right? So I'm not entirely sure what we change, right? We've hired the AV staff. We've laid out what the cost to lease the printers are. These are all things that are functioning as part of this session, put in place by primarily the Legislative Council, reviewed by the fiscal. You know, it's fairly easy to say, well, next year we're going to have less staff and change that in a bill. We could make last year we're going to have less printers, or we're going to make some other decisions, but this is the operational costs of what's happening now, right? And so that's the year we're in a lawsuit. That's what's happening now. Whether you like the lawsuit or not, we're in a lawsuit, right? Whether you think we should be there or not, we're in a lawsuit. Right, that's just what is. And so, Representative Falk, I am hesitant to wait a day because I always worry about not having this happen. Normally, it's rare I'll do executive action the same day on a bill if even one person asks. But I mean, in total honesty, do you see something that, I don't know what we change?
Mr. Chair and Representative Jones, I can't disagree with that, to be honest. You know, sometimes things don't jump out at you in 15 minutes, but they do in a few hours. I can't see anything, so I probably would be a reluctant yes if we took the vote.
Okay, and Representative Gillette.
Mr. Chair, I mean, it's maybe not as much, at least for me personally, it's maybe not as much that what I would change. It's that some of the things in here I'm not totally solid on, and because it doesn't go through a committee, I can't like turn to a committee chair and say, can you explain this to me or anything like this. Like the one that catches my eye is like Senate staff, the ratio of Senate staff to House staff. I mean, they have a lot more staff than us, and I'm trying to make sense of why that is. This is probably not the right forum for that to happen. I probably just need to have a conversation with other people, but it's harder for me to vote on a bill that I really don't understand all the pieces of it, so it's just more challenging for me, Mr. Chair.
Probably Representative Gillette, probably a good question for the Senate President, because they seem to have added some extra staff. And so I would... and I understand would like some additional staff on top of this, which I've been resisting. That being said, those are the questions potentially to ask the Senate why they need so much staff, because unfortunately they're there right now. And so that's the challenge on some of this. Happily, if you want to talk to the senators about the staff they hire, or the House, the Speaker about his staff, you know, and to be honest, there's rumblings out there of amendments to add additional partisan staff. I personally think we have enough staff. That being said, life is good. But yeah, I don't know what changes because it's underway, other than you can change it in the upcoming year is the truth. You can, and by all means, I hope people investigate it, because these questions come on the floor. And the other thing, and since I have to give this on the floor and I don't just get to turn it over to staff, as you hear these questions, I would hope that we can get some sheets, because I get by myself, I get to answer them on the floor. So, but given where we find ourselves, my inclination is to do executive. Representative Falk.
Yes, I have one question on this spreadsheet breakdown, Mr. Chair and Bill Presenter, and just because I've had some time to look at it, and maybe it was already covered, but if you look on, what would it be, page 1, section 1, Ledge Services Division, 23 session, session other administrative costs, accountants love other categories on their income statement. 23 session, $633,000. This session, $1.2 million. Again, maybe, I apologize, I'm not trying to stretch this out. Maybe somebody already talked about it, but that's a doubling. I'm not going to propose an amendment, probably wouldn't work anyway, but can somebody explain that?
I'm happy to redirect that to whatever of our staff wishes to speak to that.
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk. So what's included in that other administrative costs is, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record, so that's half a researcher, half an attorney, the AV engineer that Director Howe spoke about, the AV temp, a temporary editor to edit bills, contracted services that include support of the session suite of applications, which includes bill drafting, the committee application, and the chamber application, the contract to maintain the House and Senate chamber vote boards, and then that also includes the outside legal line item, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And Ms. Carter, for my sake, I'd love when we have this all laid out on the floor, I want to have a spreadsheet that kind of lists a bunch of that so I can answer them comfortably. So I'm pleased that you did. Any additional conversation here? Mr. Vice Chair, would you move executive action on House Bill 1?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move do pass on House Bill 1.
You've heard the motion of the Vice Chair, do pass on House Bill 1. Is there discussion? Additional discussion? Additional discussion. Okay, at this point, I would love to not have to roll call this whole committee, but if you're a no vote, raise your hand and I'll decide if I'm going to go. Okay, so with that, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There's none opposed. I suppose I should call him. Oh, he's here. Is he back? No, John. He's back. Is he hiding? He's back there. He's back. You can't see. I can't see. You can see him. He's hiding back there. Okay. Well, as long as he's here. Passed unanimous, even if the blind man can't see that John Fitz is back there. So, okay, with that, the bill will progress its way to the floor. With that, which means I've got to have the spreadsheet ready for the floor. So with that, we're going to do a little bit of training. We had asked that Josh and Nick work through some items so that we are a little prepared for the work ahead. So Josh and or Nick, whoever wants to go first, it's to you, my friends.
All right. For the record, my name is Nick Van Brown. I'm with the Legislative Fiscal Division. What I'm showing you today is a concept that we are thinking about in our office and would propose to you all and would like feedback on. In your subcommittees, you're going to see the budget in a lot of detail at different levels from accounts and funds and all these kind of things. What we're proposing here is to bring this up to a little higher level and see if this is of interest to you all. So what I have here is the first kind of rough draft of this concept. And what you're seeing is the expenditures for 2024. This is the last full year of state expenditures. And the hard part about a lot of these state expenditures is definitions and starting points. So in this situation right here, what I'm using for a definition is under 177150, which is called state resources. So there's a definition in statute about what to include and not to include, and it's basic, and a lot of that is about the double counting and whatnot. But if we use that definition, I think we can paint this picture clearly about where the money is spent by state government. So right now there's three charts on this page. You'll see this chart here, which is the payment by section. You'll see this chart here, this pie chart, which is the accounts, so benefits and claims, operating, local assistance, personal services. And then this over here are the departments. For example, this big one here is Public Health and Human Services, and then Office of Public Instruction, Revenue, Transportation, Commissioner of Higher Education, and so on. But with these definitions in place, and I think we're very close on these definitions. There might be some cleanup, but if this is something you want us to continue, we will work on that. You can see certain things. For example, we have an OTO flag. So if we take last year's spending and we just look at the OTOs, you can see that the different departments have some OTOs down here. There's always some one time only, but by far the basic expense was the rebates. Property tax rebates, income tax rebates. This is the money that was sent back. So if you look at the budget in this kind of framework, you can see really the scope of those OTO expenditures. If we switch that then, and maybe just talk about the ongoing, what you'll see is Department of Revenue kind of falls down in this size because all of those rebates went out through the Department of Revenue. And we can break this down further. Now that we're on state resources, there's really 5 fund types. There's enterprise, capital projects, and then general, state, special, and federal. You talk about general, state, special, and federal all the time. Some of you talk about capital projects a lot. You don't talk about enterprise much, and those are funds that are spent like a business. So there's 2, basically. There's the lottery, and then there's the liquor warehouse. Money is spent on inventory for the liquor warehouse, then it gets repaid as people buy it. So that's a full $250 million of your expenditures. Very easy to explain when we get to this level. Capital projects, similarly, that big green box or teal box, that's your long-range building. The stuff at the bottom for those other agencies is your long-range IT. So you can see where your capital project money goes out in these 05 funds. And that's 180. The general, state, special, and federal, this is the bulk of it, though. And interestingly, if we look at federal, it's almost a full half of this remainder, right? So federal is close to the same amount of money that kind of is collected within the state in general and state special. But if we look at these together, these 3, and look at spending, it gets to be interesting on where this spending actually occurs. So if once again, we're not in the minutia, we're talking about these big levels. Benefits and claims, for example, if we click on that, you can see that the vast majority of public health's budget or spending was in benefits and claims. That's what you would see in the budget stuff, but you can see it very clearly here. Similarly, there's grants that go out. Grants tend to go to the Office of Public Instruction. There's more grants that go out in HHS. This is another part of their budget. There is local assistance that the state does. This is where you see the vast majority of OPI's money. This is money going out to schools. So, and then the other big part of this, and a reason Section A, general government, is large, is here in the Department of Revenue. this is money that generally goes out to cities, counties. This is local money going out. So all of this local assistance, you see basically out of these two agencies, a little bit here in Department of Administration going out. There's transfers out. This is another thing that's included in state resources. This is here in Commission of Higher Education. This is the money that goes to universities. So in this account level, you can see that. And if you were to look at, I mean, this is something that we could talk about what you want to see, but transfers out, grants, and local assistance, this is all kind of money that goes to different organizations within the state, universities, cities, counties. It goes out for water and sewer, it goes out for fire. You can see that where that goes out and which agencies send that out. And what that leaves is personal services, right? And this is the chunk that, I'm sorry, before personal services, operating. It leaves operating and personal services. Operating is interesting because it's a lot more stuff going on in HHS, and then it's in transportation. This is your roads. So transportation books all of their money out in operating. So you see a lot of it there. And then obviously in corrections. Corrections has a lot for the prison system. And then that leaves personal services. And this is the payment of people to do these jobs. You do have pretty big, I mean, these big agencies like HHS and transportation do have personal services, as does corrections, which is another big agency. You can see it in Department of Justice, and then a lot of these smaller agencies, these tend to be highly personal services driven agencies, where these are programs where people are paid to do these functions. For example, the judiciary, here's the legislative branch, livestock, school for the deaf and blind. These are highly personal service driven agencies. So when you pull that all back, it's interesting to see. I mean, HHS, or Health and Human Services, obviously the big one. But when we talk about things like educate, medicate, incarcerate, when you pull it to this level, actually the incarceration falls to a smaller portion. It's very much a piece of the general fund. When we talk about the general fund, that becomes part of that phrase, medicate, incarcerate, educate, is very appropriate on the general fund. But for for all three of your funds, you can see things like roads are a huge player in your budgets, or where your spending goes. And another interesting thing is when we look at these lines, and you dig into these, there's often a big line or two that explain a lot of these things, whether it's, payments out through the lottery or money to cities and counties. You can see a lot of these pretty clearly once you get to this definitional level. I think this is interesting. This is something we would be willing to develop more if you all find this interesting. It's just a higher view on this. It's a view that, there's nothing new here, but it's just a way of looking at this. And if you have feedback or interest in this, we'd be happy to continue developing and maybe get you another version next week and get it online for you, those kind of things. So this is the concept. It's not something we look at generally at this level, but hopefully you find it useful.
Conversation, questions here. Representative Vinton.
Again, as a newbie, there's no question this would be beneficial. I think it's a great idea.
Additional? Representative Gillette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How far back does this go? We're just looking one biennium back in time, but how far back can you go?
Yeah, so Chair Jones, Representative Gillette, this is based off the general ledger for the state. So realistically, we can get back to about 2002 because that's when the new SABRE system came into being. And really, I mean, it was the year before, but it really developed. The issue becomes these definitions, right? How do you go back in time and identify the OTOs? How do you make sure your state resources is the right definition? It's that minutia of going line by line saying like, oh, this is real, this should be counted, this shouldn't be counted because it's you know, this is just a transfer within the system. We don't want to double count that, those kind of things. I think we can go back further, and I think that there will be interesting things to see as you compare, you know, say 2004 and 14 and 24. Like, how does it change over the decades? I would feel less comfortable with our 2004 data than our 2024 data, but I think it's good enough to, especially at this level, to have this conversation.
Additional? Representative Crow.
Mr. Chair, no question, but just a comment, and I agree with Representative Vinton. If I can see it, I can understand it a lot better. But one thing to keep in mind is that you may have a lot of folks who are colorblind. Look at the statistic with 1 out of every 7 men is colorblind. So there's somebody around this room that's colorblind.
Yeah, so Chair Jones, Representative.
Thank you.
We have a color palette that is better for that. We would adjust this. These are the default colors. They're very saturated, but we have someone who works with those colorblind palettes to get there. So hopefully that is taken care of by people who are better at visuals than me.
Additional comments? Representative Cafaro, Vice Chair Cafaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Brown, so is this can you explain what period of time this covers? Is it a point in time or?
Yes, Chair Jones, Representative, I apologize. This is the last, this is the last fiscal year. So this is fiscal year 24 only. This is 1 year of spending. And the thing that you're probably not accustomed to seeing is that as opposed to, say, House Bill 2, this is all state resources. So it includes House Bill 2, it includes other bills, it includes statutories. Those are the big ones. It includes other things. There's a whole definition in 17.7.150, but this is a bigger view of the budget than you're used to seeing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions, comments? Actually, I've always liked the visuals. While we do most of our work with the general fund, we also work with the state specials and certainly see the federal as it moves around as well. And, you know, the general fund, I'm fond of telling folks about 90+% goes to educate, incarcerate, medicate. That's where it doesn't stay in Helena, that's where it goes. But when you start talking about the state specials, and a definition that always helped me with state specials for the new folks, I always thought about it as special source, special designation. Gas tax goes to the roads. FWP license dollars go to a special source, special designation, right? So your state specials tend to be more directed to a purpose, where the general fund is more directly appropriated. And while we control the spend, for instance, we can say you can't spend licensed dollars on that. It's usually impossible to move licensed dollars to some area they don't belong, right? And so there's some controls on the special source, special designation. And the federal tends to be matched with something. But the more visual you see it, the better off it is. So I like all this stuff, as always. Of course, I'm a data geek, so that would make sense. Additional? Okay.
Thank you.
So Sam, I believe, Josh is going to do the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, for the record, Josh Paulette with the Legislative Fiscal Division. So we've gotten a few questions recently about budget change documents, or what we call BCDs, one of which is called budget amendments, which are called BAs. We also use the term BA to talk about your budget analysis that you'll receive in your subcommittee, right? So we're going to do a little acronym ping pong in here and try to help everybody get a baseline of understanding with what is a budget change document, when they're used, right? And also talk a little bit about supplemental appropriations or supplementals, which have a relation. So what I've handed out here is kind of an in brief. This is 4 pages. There's about a page and a half that's sort of in brief, budget change documents or BCDs and the supplemental process, and then another 2.5 pages that are more in depth. So I'm probably just going to go through the first page and a half and leave you to read the remainder if you're curious about it. And of course, be happy to talk with any of you at any time about these things. I am in 173, which is, if you were to go through that door and the next door and the next door, that's 173. Okay, so that's where I am, and I also staff Section B. So if you have Section B questions, please come see me. So budget change documents permit the executive the ability to modify the budget while you are not in town, really. I mean, that's sort of the the bottom line of it. There are several of them, probably 9 or 10 total. Some are much more common than others, right? So what we've listed here, those first 3 are the most common probably, and certainly the ones that we talk about the most. So when we say BCD, again, we mean budget change documents. And the way these work is, in general, an executive agency wants to make a change to their budget. They prepare a budget change spreadsheet. They send it to the governor's budget office. The governor's budget office either says looks good or try again, right? And then eventually they either sign off on it or deny it. At that point, we get notifications in our office throughout the process. So we see these things come through the system, right? And have the ability to comment on them if they reach a certain threshold. They're reviewed by the Finance Committee, right? Especially some more than others. But your IBCs, your interim budget committees, generally we spend, every quarter, your staff will spend some amount of time in that presentation talking to you about what budget changes occurred in the last quarter that you're reviewing in that meeting. So let's start off with BAs, budget amendments. Most of the time, BAs are federal authority. They can be used for specific cases of state special authority, but most of the time they're for federal authority. And the reason that this tool exists is to allow agencies the ability to accept federal dollars that were not considered or could not have been considered by the legislature, right? So imagine imagine on May 15th, a federal agency says, we're opening this grant program. And imagine that you're not here on May 15th, right? You could be, but you may not be here on May 15th. The agency could then say, okay, this is a grant program we are interested in, but we don't have, and it's say we're going to apply for $6 million. We don't have $6 million of federal authority in our budget, right, that we can use to apply for this grant. So the agency will say to the governor's budget office, we would like to add $6 million of federal authority to our budget, right, because we're going to get this grant and we want to be able to get the cash from the feds and spend it. But they need an appropriation, they need authority to spend that money. That is a budget amendment. A program transfer moves money, moves authority from one program or division to another within an agency. So program and division, most of the time when we are probably as guilty as anyone of using those terms interchangeably. Programs and divisions are how we divide up agencies, right? So in DPHHS, which is my agency, we've got 16 of them. We've got 16 divisions or 16 programs within our agency. Where that gets confusing sometimes is, someone might say, I might even say, how many programs does the agency have? Well, what I'm thinking about really are tasks, right? They've got traditional Medicaid, they've got child welfare, they've got Medicaid expansion, and all these other things. Those aren't programs in this sense. In this sense, it's the division of the agency into its parts and pieces, right? And generally, they're, in our case, in DPHHS, we've got a program or division that is in charge of the facilities, right? So those 7 state-owned facilities, they're in one program or division. So the agencies have the ability. So you're going to leave town, you're going to assign in House Bill 2 appropriations for those divisions. House Bill 2 has divisions in it, right, or programs in it. The agency may get, 6 months into the next fiscal year and say, we need to shift it, right? We have too much in this division. We don't have enough in this one. A program transfer is how they do that. And again, it goes through the governor's budget office. If it hits a certain threshold, we're going to comment on it or have the ability to comment on it in our office. And they are reviewed by the interim budget committees. There are cases in which certain appropriations cannot be moved in that manner, right? So Medicaid would be, the case that I deal with the most. So Medicaid appropriations due to a law that's on the books, I think that went into effect in 21, cannot be moved. So if the agency were to say, we have too much money in Medicaid, or we have more than we need in Medicaid, we want to move some of it to our facilities, they can't do it, right? If they had more money than they needed in let's say child welfare, which is not the case, but if they had more money than they needed in child welfare and they wanted to move it to the facilities, they could, because that money is not restricted. So when the legislature makes a decision to restrict money in House Bill 2 or puts a rule on the books, puts a law on the books that restricts money in statute, that's not available for program transfer use, right? So program transfers can involve general fund, state special, federal funds can involve any of the fund types. Operating plan changes change how the money is spent. Nick just took you through personal services, benefits and claims, right? Operating expenses, the different ways in which we categorize expenditures. So if I'm an agency and I say, I've got less individuals on this program than I thought, right? So I can reduce my benefits and claims, but I need to hire contractors to do this other service, I'm going to put that into operating expenses. So I can take $1 million out of benefits and claims, which generally are payments to individuals or for individual services, and put it into operating expenses, right? That's an operating plan change. And then the reorganization, you don't see these as often as the others, but they do occur. These occur when the agencies make changes to their programs or divisions or other sort of significant changes. So really, this could be, we're going to concentrate 2 divisions into one, we're going to create a new division, and in order to do that, we're going to take pieces, right? We're going to take tasks away from some other existing ones, create a new division. So those are some examples of BCDs. In a biennial budgeting state, the executive has, because the legislature's not in town to, review appropriations as often, although we do have the budget committees, right, which look at things every quarter. There's authority granted to the executive to make changes of this type. They all are reviewable, though, right? These things don't happen in dark of night. We know about them, and we talk about them in our IBCs, and we talk about them in the Finance Committee. The next section is current year appropriation bills. So House Bill 1, I think we're all familiar with that at this point. House Bill 3, the supplemental bill, right? So this is a bill that basically increases the appropriations for the current fiscal year, right, as requested or as needed by the agencies. So we have an example of this in my section, DPHHS. I think they have a request in the supplemental bill in House Bill 3 for it's $22 million or somewhere in that ballpark of general fund, right? Something like that. So basically what they're saying is we don't have enough for the current fiscal year, the year we're living in right now, fiscal 25, to make it to the end of the year. So we want the legislature to give us additional authority in House Bill 3. And then House Bill 4 is the budget amendment bill, right? So this correlates with the budget amendment with the BA authority we described above. When the legislature's in session, you have the ability to review budget amendments in House Bill 4. So it's when you are not in session that the budget amendments come through the BCD process. So that's the current year appropriation bills, obviously, and then we skip 2 because I think we all know what that is. That's different.
So you're basically to the line, right? House Bill 3 and 4. You haven't talked to supplementals.
So I have flipped over to the second page, and I'm going to talk about the supplemental process briefly.
Okay, so when you get done with the supplementals, we'll pause at your line there for a second. So
sure, I can pause now, Mr. Chair. If you
go ahead and get through the supplemental, and then we'll.
Okay, so if we are in the first year of the biennium, so if we get into fiscal 26 and there's an agency that says we are going to spend more, we are on track to spend more general fund in 2026 than we have, they can request that the governor's budget office moves, let's just take general fund for this example. This is where this most commonly occurs, moves general fund from the second year appropriation into the first year. So imagine they have a $10 million general fund appropriation in 26, and they have a $10 million appropriation in 27. Then they say, we think we're going to spend $11 million in 26. We want to move $1 million from 27 into 26, right? So what they have to do is then say, okay, you want to move the $1 million, you have to come up with a plan to reduce. How are you going to operate with $9 million in year 2, right? That's kind of the idea. If they get into year 2 and they say, well, we can't actually operate with $9 million, then we can go back to House Bill 3, right? Now we're back in House Bill 3 world. They say we need $12 million in year 2. Now we're back in House Bill 3, and they can say we're going to ask for $3 million in House Bill 3, because we think we're going to need to spend $12 million in year 2. Right, so that is the supplemental process. That transfer from the second year to the first year is, usually people call that fiscal year transfer. And that is my nutshell of BCDs 1, 3, and 4 and the supplementals. I'll pause for questions at this point.
Okay, so we'll hear House Bill 3 and 4 tomorrow, the budget amendment bill and the supplemental bill. Now, those we won't act upon right away. We just hear them to get them on the record. But because budget amendments and supplementals could potentially occur right up to our transmittal date, we tend to hold them. And then if there's an amendment, because there could potentially be an additional federal grant, for instance, we tend to amend that as current as we can right before it leaves. So you will hear the 2 bills. But Representative Gillette asked some very good questions about budget amendments that were occurring year after year after year. Shouldn't they be part of the budget? And yes, they should, right? It's one thing to have an amendment once or twice because it's an unusual thing, but if it's always occurring, it should be real. And so with that, I'll quit talking on this. We'll go through the other 2 bills, but Representative Gillette, do you have additional questions?
I have maybe one question and one comment, Mr. Chair. Dr. Paulette, that was like life-changing for me. Thank you. I definitely have it clear in my head now, and that was so helpful. One follow-up question I have, I guess maybe 2, is with respect to House Bill 4. During that, we will see basically the budget amendments. Are those the budget amendments that have already been considered by the IBCs or the LFC they've already been approved and we're just rehashing them again? Or are, not IBC obviously, but is LFC moving those budget amendments forward and approving them without going through this process?
Josh.
Yeah, Mr. Representative Gillette, I'm actually tracking House Bill 4 right now. I'm just going to toss that to Quinn. So I think he may know better than me.
Okay, Quinn.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gillette, that's a great question, because House Bill 3 you'll see tomorrow, and it's like 2 pages, and it's fairly discreet. But House Bill 4, there's a lot going on. There's 20-plus pages. And you have a number of things with the federal authority that was amended in previously. In quite a number of cases in there, what you'll see is authority that might have been granted to that agency in fiscal 22 or fiscal 23, and it just is extending that authority into this next biennium. So there is a lot of that where it's like they had the authority amended in, but they need to extend it into the next biennium to continue to be able to spend the grant funds that were provided. In other cases where there might be a grant that comes up this month that nobody knew about, they would come before us and ask for an amendment through the process that the whole legislature would see and approve. It could potentially go in that bill. It could potentially go elsewhere as well, but typically those kind of grants that are not discrete to a biennium, like House Bill 2 is with everything, would be included in that House Bill 4 process.
Mr. Chair, follow-up. Mr. Holzer, are you, so does the Legislative Finance Committee, do they have any authority to approve those, or they might see them and review them, but they still always end up in House Bill 4, Mr. Chair? Yeah, I don't really know.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gillette, I apologize. I'm trying to break your question apart in my mind, and I may need Amy's help here at some point too, but not necessarily that they would end up in House Bill 4. Okay. It could be a small grant that they got the grant a year and a half ago. It's already spent. It's a done deal. It's not going to be in House Bill 4.
Okay. Then I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair. I think I understand.
Follow-up.
Mr. Paulette, Dr. Gillette, or Paulette, did you say that with respect to the program transfers, when they reach a certain threshold, that that staff will basically flag it and let us know? And if so, then what is that threshold internally? Is there a number, or how do you know that something's reached a threshold or not?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Gillette, that's laid out in statute. So it's called triggering. So when they hit, I don't exactly remember what the numbers are, but it's like either 10% or $1 million or something. It's something to that effect, right? That by fund type that we get flagged. And basically my counterparts in the budget office will say, we've got a BCD going through, and it's not just program transfers. The triggers can happen in other types of BCDs as well, though they're probably most common in program transfers. And they'll say, hey, we've got a triggering BCD, please comment, right? Please give us comment if you have any comment. And what we do then is, we look at it, the relevant staffer was going to look at it. Okay, this involves, my division, your division. Is there anything here that we think, requires additional information, requires us to ask some questions, get some clarity, right? Generally, when I respond to a program transfer flagging, I'm not saying this seems wrong to me. I'm generally saying I need more detail, right? Please give me more detail on why this occurred, or why these 3 things occurred, right? Because there is a description in the actual budget change document, but it can be fairly brief. And I might want more than that to be comfortable with, like, all right, I know what's happening here. This is legal. We're not violating any sort of restrictions on appropriations. This is fine. But then I can explain it, to people who ask.
Mr. Chair, then my last kind of more question thought for you.
Follow up, and I'll make one comment at this point on budget amendments. So I've always seen the budget amendments as 2 finite time periods, and correct me if I'm wrong. If we're not in town, and let's say a federal grant became available in July, then it still requires a budget amendment that they report out, but it doesn't necessarily end up in House Bill 4. But continuing authority that covers the period where we're in town, or a grant that arrives when we're in town, ends up in House Bill 4. Am I correct on that? Because I mean, hopefully I didn't say the supplemental bill, I was flipping in my head. But budget amendments to me always had two time frames. That was, we were in town and thus it required, or that the authority continued through the time frame we were here. But a one-time grant that showed up when we weren't in town is still a budget amendment, but the exec can authorize it and just report on it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's how I understand it as well, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how we started this conversation is what I noticed in Section B for Department of Public Health and Human Services. What I noticed is there was this one program that program had been around for, I don't know, at least a decade, probably longer. And that money is coming down through the feds. But it was always being appropriated through the budget amendment process, even though it was a regular source of funding and very predictable. And in fact, this one program is predicted to have increased federal funding coming up. And I would say that for the most part, my perception is that the executive or the agencies use these different processes to just deal with variables that happen. A one-time grant comes along, and through the Department of Transportation, you've got to go for it. Then that's your one shot. Like I think for the most part, it's being done like that. I would say occasionally, sometimes they might use it to kind of circumvent having the legislature be able to see that program and to consider that in their budget. So I kind of think that we should have maybe a common understanding of, like, if you have a program that's being, funded biennium after biennium, maybe it's a good idea to just start pulling it into, our base and start thinking about it in those terms and considering it above the board. I kind of have toyed around with either, like, if that program, if we've been receiving funding for 6 years or maybe 8 years, like, it's probably time it's the same program, we should probably be thinking about it at least.
And I absolutely agree with that, right? If something is consistently showing up, I don't know why it's being budget amended. It should be part of the federal authority, that you should be able to see it. Now, if it's unusual or it's a different item, then it matters. And as we talk about these, and we'll stop here because we're getting towards 5, but as we talk through these things, the challenge Montana has is a 2-year legislature, right? So think about running your business like that, which is basically you come here, we are a board of directors, right? We try to set our expectations, and you forecast 2 years forward. And you say, well, this is what payroll's going to be, and this is how many inspectors we need to do our houses, and we think this number of snowplows and snowplow drivers, and we come up with our best shot, right? That's what we do. But then time goes on, and you have a recession or you have an explosion, market value goes up, something happens. So you try to balance the flexibility of allowing the executive to make decisions with the constraint to make sure the executive is actually following its direction of its appropriators. And it's an interesting dance, right? Because the exec always searches for more freedom, and so you try to find that line where you're doing a good job of managing, but you also recognize we're not here every year. So it's an interesting work. This was just, hopefully, Representative Gillette had a fair question. What if they budget amendment all the time? How come it's a budget amendment? That's fair if it's the same thing. Why should it be? It shouldn't be. And I think Section B needs to deal with that, right? And I'm sure you will. I'm sorry, did somebody? Okay. Yeah. Okay, Josh, I think we'll pause at this point, but we'll read the rest of the document here, because each day now over the couple times we'll try to work on a little bit of training. We'll talk about, because we have some time until we get charged up with bills, we'll continue to try to work at that. So with that, is there additional, at this point, questions? Or,
Quinn.
okay, I'm sorry, Quinn, you have to tap me. You're on my blind side.
Mr. Chair, I was actually just waiting to make sure everything else got covered first, but I did just housekeeping, in case you aren't aware of this, these brown folders, if you put your bills and stuff in here, they will collect those and then bring them back or leave them here, depending on committees and going on and stuff. But anything left outside of those, though, will get recycled and moved on. So if you want to put your bills in there until they're heard, and so that you have them when we do executive action, but if you leave them out, then when they are acted on, like House Bill 1 has been acted on, do you want to continue to keep that in there, or will that just, so if you leave it out, they'll go ahead and recycle it?
So basically, if once a bill's had executive action, it's leaving, just set the folder on the front of your desk and it'll go away and the folder gets recycled. If we are holding the bill to do action in the future, stick it in your folder. We'll take it back out and do action on it. One more thing that Quinn had mentioned is, I guess there is some time pressure on the supplemental this time. Apparently, there is some things that will run out of money, so maybe we won't be holding the supplemental as long as I thought. That came down from the budget office. At least one of the supplementals has some pressure on it that's bringing some time in. It must be. It's probably at section D if it's my normal supplemental challenges, but so Quinn.
Mr. Chair, I was just told too that if you are using your legal pad and taking notes on it, if you can, there's a couple of ways that can be dealt with, right? If you rip off your notes and put them in there, and then they'll collect the legal pad and bring it back. If you put your whole legal pad in there, they're going to bring your folder back with the legal pad in it, and you're going to have another one at your spot. And if you start collecting those, it's going to add up. So.
Okay, seeing nothing else for the good of the order, Representative Gillette, I need to catch you. I need to catch you for a second. Yes. Seeing nothing else for the good of the order, we are adjourned, and so we will see you tomorrow.